The first time I really noticed her, I was late for class, again. I slipped quietly into the lecture hall, trying not to draw attention, but somehow she always seemed to notice everything. Mid-40s, confident, poised in a way that demanded respect without demanding attention. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, a few strands framing her face, softening the sharp intelligence in her eyes. She stood at the front of the room, explaining a concept I had read about a dozen times but never really understood. Her voice was calm but carried a subtle authority, and I found myself drawn in, hanging on every word. Not because it was complicated, but because she made it feel important. Every pause, every glance at a student, every tilt of her head held weight. Then she looked at me. Just me. And for a second, the world narrowed to her eyes in that small, knowing smile. "Pay attention," she said softly, her tone playful but layered with meaning. "There's more to learn than you think." I swallowed, cheeks warming, and nodded like a fool. My heart was doing something it hadn't done in years, racing, tight in my chest, pulling me toward her even though she hadn't moved an inch. I tried to focus on the lecture, but my attention kept drifting to her. The way her fingers lightly tapped the edge of the podium, the subtle scent of her perfume that floated across the room, the gentle sway of her stance as she explained a point with patience and authority. Everything about her seemed effortless, yet it held me captive. At one point, she moved closer to a student to correct a mistake, and I noticed how naturally her hand hovered near theirs, reassuring without overstepping. There was a grace in her movements, a quiet vulnerability that peeked through the confident exterior. It was magnetic. When class ended, I gathered my things slowly, almost hoping for another glance, another word. And I got it. Just as I was leaving, she gave a small nod toward me, as if acknowledging that she had noticed me noticing her. My chest tightened. I wasn't sure why, but I knew I wanted more than just acknowledgement. Walking out into the hallway, I replayed the entire class in my head. Every word, every gesture, every small interaction felt significant. I couldn't tell if it was admiration, curiosity, or something I wasn't ready to name yet. All I knew was that I wanted to understand her, not just her lessons, but her. And that's when she said it, softly, almost under her breath as she adjusted a stack of papers. "Stay after class? I'll show you real lessons." I froze. My pulse spiked, a strange mixture of excitement and nerves flooding me. I nodded quickly, unsure if I had heard correctly, unsure if I was ready. But inside, something told me that this was the beginning of something I couldn't walk away from, no matter how much I might try. That day, I realized that learning wasn't just about textbooks or lectures. Sometimes, the most important lessons come from people who notice you in ways no one else does. After that first glimpse of her attention, I couldn't help but notice her more often. At first, it was just small things. The way she adjusted her glasses when she read a student's paper, the faint rustle of her blouse as she walked between desks, the gentle cadence of her voice that somehow made even the driest lecture feel alive. I found myself sitting a little straighter, answering a little more carefully, just to catch her eye. And sometimes I did. Sometimes she'd pause, her gaze lingering on my work slightly longer than it did on anyone else's, and I would feel a flutter in my chest that I tried, and failed, to hide. In the hallway, our encounters were brief but charged. One day, I stopped to ask a question about the assignment. She leaned slightly toward me, elbows resting on her desk, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "You've got potential," she said softly, almost teasingly. "Don't waste it staring out the window." I laughed nervously, my fingers curling around my notebook. I'm trying." Her eyes softened. "I can tell," she said. And just like that, she moved on, leaving a faint trace of her perfume behind, a mixture of vanilla and something floral, that clung to my senses long after she walked away. Sometimes she offered small gestures of attention. A correction that felt personal rather than instructional. A look of encouragement when I stumbled over a difficult concept. Each time, my pulse jumped. I couldn't explain why her approval mattered so much, but it did. It felt like recognition, like she saw something in me no one else had. Other students never seemed to notice the subtle shift in her demeanor with me. It wasn't favoritism. I don't think she could even define it herself. It was connection. Quiet, fleeting, and fragile. One afternoon, I lingered after class just to organize my notes, and she caught me. "You're dedicated," she said, her tone soft, almost reflective. Most students would have left already. And I knew, deep down, that every small moment, every lingering glance, was setting the stage for something neither of us could yet name, a lesson far beyond anything written in a syllabus. It was one of those late afternoons when the classroom was nearly empty, the light from the setting sun filtering through the blinds and painting golden stripes across the floor. Most students had already left, their chatter fading down the hallway, leaving only the hum of the projector and the soft shuffle of papers. She looked up from her desk as I lingered, organizing my notes, pretending to study while my mind raced. Her eyes met mine, and there was that familiar warmth, that faint curve of a smile that made my pulse stutter. "Stay after class?" she said softly, her tone casual, yet carrying an undertone of something I couldn't quite name. "I'll show you real lessons." My stomach flipped. Part of me wanted to argue, to retreat into the safety of my ordinary student life. But something in her gaze held me rooted, a quiet insistence that this was meant to happen. I nodded quickly, trying to hide the nervous excitement that surged through me. The classroom emptied, leaving us alone. The familiar smell of chalk dust mixed with the faint aroma of her perfume, soft and lingering, wrapping around me like an invisible warmth. She gestured toward a desk near the window, and I sat down, suddenly aware of the space between us, small, but charged. She moved closer, leaning over a set of papers I had spread across the desk. Her fingers brushed mine lightly as she pointed to a paragraph, and though the touch was brief, it left a spark that made me acutely aware of every inch of proximity between us. "Most students read the words," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "Few actually understand what they mean. Learning isn't just memorization, it's about seeing the bigger picture." I nodded, captivated not just by the lesson, but by the way she spoke. Every motion was precise yet graceful, every word carried depth. The light caught the glint of her eyes, and for a moment, the classroom felt suspended outside of time, the world reduced to her voice, her presence, and the subtle warmth radiating from her hand near mine. She leaned back slightly, observing me, almost like a sculptor studying a form, her gaze patient and probing. "You're paying attention," she murmured. "Good. But attention isn't enough. You have to want to understand, really want to know why things matter." I swallowed, my heart hammering. The conversation wasn't just about academics anymore. Every word, every glance, every subtle gesture felt layered with meaning I wasn't fully ready to interpret. And yet, I didn't want to look away. By the time our time together drew to a close, I realized I was no longer thinking about assignments or lessons in the traditional sense. I was thinking about her, the way her presence commanded the room, the warmth of her hand, the way her voice lingered in my mind long after she looked away. That afternoon, I learned something I hadn't anticipated. Lessons weren't just found in textbooks. Sometimes, the real lessons were in the quiet moments, in the attention of someone who noticed you, truly noticed you, and made you feel that your existence, however small, mattered. The classroom felt different when everyone else had left. The hum of the fluorescent lights was softer, the distant sounds of the hallway muted. It was as if the room itself had shifted, waiting just for us. She gestured for me to sit across from her at the desk, a pile of papers between us, and I did so, trying to appear calm while my pulse raced. "Most lessons," she began, her voice low, deliberate, "don't come from textbooks." She leaned over slightly, pointing to a passage in one of the assignments. Her fingers brushed mine, just briefly, but enough to send a small shock through me, a warmth that had nothing to do with the classroom heat. I tried to focus on the words, on the concept she was explaining, but it was impossible. Every glance, every subtle movement of her hand, every soft shift of her posture drew me in. She had a way of teaching that felt alive, that made the abstract tangible. But it wasn't just the academic lesson. It was the way she looked at me, really looked, as though she were trying to understand not just my answers but me. She paused and tilted her head, studying my reaction. "You're curious," she said softly. "That's good. But curiosity without guidance can be wasted. You have to learn to see beyond the obvious." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words, and not just in an intellectual sense. There was a deeper message here, about life, about paying attention, about noticing what most people overlook. And somehow, I felt like she was teaching me more than just theory. She was teaching me about patience, observation, and the quiet power of presence. Then, almost unconsciously, she shared something personal. A story from her own life, a mistake she had made, a moment she had doubted herself, a lesson she had learned the hard way. She spoke quietly, without dramatics, letting me sit with the words, letting me feel the significance in the small, intimate details she chose to reveal. I found myself listening, utterly absorbed. There was a vulnerability beneath her confidence, a hint of loneliness and wisdom intertwined, and it made her seem even more human, more real. As she returned to the papers in front of us, her hand brushed mine again, lightly this time, as she guided me through a complex passage. I couldn't stop noticing the warmth, the closeness, the subtle electricity in the quiet space between us. Every small gesture, every word, felt deliberate, though gentle, teaching me not just about the lesson on the page but about connection, attention, and trust. By the time I left that afternoon, I wasn't thinking about assignments or grades. I was thinking about her, the way she noticed things others didn't, the quiet patience she carried, and the undeniable pull I felt toward her. The real lesson, I realized, wasn't in the textbook. It was here, in the moments she made me feel seen, heard, and quietly challenged. And I wanted more. In the days that followed, our interactions grew more frequent, though still casual in appearance. Every time I stayed after class, she found a reason to linger near me, correcting a paper, explaining a concept, or offering small advice that somehow went beyond the curriculum. It was subtle, never forced, but it carried weight I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, we were reviewing a particularly tricky assignment. I leaned over the desk, trying to follow her instructions while keeping my heart under control. She moved closer to guide my hand, her fingers brushing mine just enough to make my pulse spike. It was brief, accidental, or at least that's what I told myself, but the warmth lingered in my veins long after she pulled away. Her voice was calm, soft, yet there was a magnetic pull in the way she spoke. "Most people just look at the words," she said, pointing to a sentence. "But you have to understand the intention behind them. That's the real lesson." I nodded, trying to focus, but my attention kept slipping to her, the curve of her smile, the way her eyes held mine for a fraction longer than necessary, the subtle tilt of her head as she listened to my questions. Every gesture was layered with meaning, and every glance left me wondering what she was thinking, what she was feeling. We lingered over the assignment longer than necessary, each moment stretching out, comfortable yet charged. Her knee brushed mine under the desk as she shifted slightly, and I froze, aware of every inch of space between us. I didn't move away, nor did she. The silence became a language of its own, a conversation that neither of us dared to voice aloud. At one point, she leaned back, a faint smile touching her lips. "You're more attentive than most," she murmured. "And I can tell you're genuinely curious. That's rare." I swallowed, my chest tightening. I wanted to respond, to tell her that her attention, her guidance, her presence, meant more than just learning for me. But I hesitated, respecting the fragile boundary that existed between teacher and student, yet acutely aware of the tension that simmered just beneath the surface. As we finally packed up, our hands brushed again, a fleeting contact that lingered in my mind long after class ended. I walked down the hallway with a strange mixture of exhilaration and restraint, knowing that every look, every gesture, every shared moment was building something neither of us could deny. It wasn't just mentorship anymore. It wasn't casual teasing or encouragement. Something was growing, subtle, unspoken, but undeniable. A connection that went beyond lessons and grades, stretching into territory neither of us had named yet, but both felt. By the time I left that day, I realized the truth. I wasn't just learning about the subject anymore. I was learning about her, about the pull she created without effort, the warmth in her attention, the quiet, magnetic power of her presence. And I knew, without question, that she felt it too. It happened one late afternoon, the classroom quiet except for the soft hum of the projector and the distant echoes of footsteps fading down the hallway. I had stayed behind to review an assignment, and she had lingered to help me correct a few mistakes. At first, it felt ordinary, just a teacher assisting a student, until it wasn't. She leaned over the desk beside me, her shoulder brushing mine. A small movement, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my chest tighten. I tried to focus on the work, on the words and numbers, but the warmth radiating from her presence was impossible to ignore. "You're improving," she said softly, her tone calm yet carrying a weight I couldn't place. "Faster than I expected." I glanced up, caught in her gaze, and felt my heartbeat spike. There was a quiet intensity in her eyes, a mixture of pride, patience, and something else, something that made my stomach twist with anticipation. As I worked on the paper, she reached out to guide my hand, helping me trace a line or adjust a margin. Her fingers brushed mine lightly, and the contact lingered, not forceful but deliberate. That fleeting touch sent a jolt through me, sharp and gentle at once. I froze, aware of every inch of space between us, aware of the magnetic pull that neither of us tried to resist. She leaned back slightly, studying me with a soft, contemplative expression. "Most people don't notice the details," she murmured. "But you do. And that's a rare thing." I swallowed hard, my thoughts tumbling. I wanted to say something, anything, to acknowledge the electricity between us, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I focused on the assignment, letting the quiet intensity of the room carry us both. Then, almost imperceptibly, she shifted closer. Her hand hovered near mine, and without thinking, I allowed it to brush against hers. The touch was light, tentative, yet it held the weight of everything unspoken. Her eyes softened, a faint, knowing smile curving her lips, and in that moment, I realized the line we had danced around for weeks had finally been crossed. It wasn't bold or dramatic. It was a whisper, a brush of skin, a shared understanding that needed no words. We were no longer just teacher and student. We were something else, something fragile, quiet, and undeniable. The moment passed, and she drew back just enough to give me space, but the energy between us lingered, humming in the quiet of the room. Every glance afterward, every soft smile, every subtle gesture carried the memory of that touch. By the time I left the classroom that evening, my thoughts were consumed not by the assignment, but by her, by the warmth of her hand, the depth of her gaze, and the undeniable connection that had begun to define every moment we shared. And in that quiet, unspoken way, I knew our lessons were no longer about schoolwork. They were about us. The days after that afternoon carried a new kind of tension, one that was quiet but persistent. Every glance, every brush of hands, every soft smile was charged with meaning. We didn't speak openly about it, but it was there, lingering between us like a secret melody only we could hear. One evening, she invited me to stay a little longer after class. The classroom was empty, the windows casting long, golden streaks of sunset across the floor. She suggested we sit by the large window, where the fading light softened everything in the room. We sat side by side, the air filled with the scent of her perfume and the subtle hum of the city outside. She draped a light cardigan over her shoulders, and before I realized it, she had casually draped the other end over me. Her touch was fleeting, almost accidental, but the warmth it left was undeniable. We didn't speak much at first. The quiet was comforting rather than awkward, as though it had been waiting for us all along. I could hear the faint rustle of papers as she adjusted them, the soft clink of her coffee cup, the gentle cadence of her breathing. And then, slowly, our hands brushed. A fleeting contact at first, but I didn't pull away. She didn't either. Her eyes met mine, softer than I'd ever seen them, carrying a depth I couldn't quite put into words. "I didn't think I'd want this again," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Want what?" I asked gently, my heart thudding in my chest. "Connection," she admitted. "After everything. I told myself I was fine alone. That I didn't need anyone. But you've made me realize how much I've been missing." I turned my hand over slowly, letting mine brush against hers. Her fingers intertwined with mine naturally, deliberately, and in that simple gesture, a world of understanding passed between us. It was quiet, tender, and everything I had been waiting for. For a long moment, we just sat like that. No confessions, no dramatic declarations, just two people who had discovered something rare and unspoken. The warmth of her hand against mine, the subtle pressure of her head leaning near my shoulder, the soft glow of the setting sun across her face, it was all enough. She shifted slightly, her cheek brushing my shoulder lightly, a silent affirmation that we were both aware of the connection we'd been cultivating. I didn't need to speak. The room, the light, the quiet, and our shared touch said it all. By the time I left, the world outside felt the same, yet everything inside me had changed. I had learned more than any textbook could teach me. I had learned about patience, trust, attention, and the quiet power of being truly seen. And in that still, golden moment, I realized the most important lesson of all, that sometimes, the real learning happens in connection, in subtle affection, and in the unspoken understanding between two hearts. I wasn't just a student anymore. I was part of something quietly profound, and she had become more than a teacher. She had become someone I couldn't imagine learning without.